Tampa Bay is known as a wrestling town, and as with everything, someone had to pave the way. We all know the late great Hulk Hogan called Tampa home, but Austin Idol is another legend who changed wrestling. But in 1975, he almost died in a plane crash that killed one of his friends. Now, 50 years later, he's reflecting back with reporter Blake Phillips showing us how Idol is still pushing forward.
Through the grace of God, I survived, okay? But it changed my life completely.
50 years ago in 1975, Mike McCord and three friends' lives changed forever.
I mean, it was crazy. It was really, really crazy because you think you're dead. I mean, that's the first thing I said to myself, you're dead, but you're not.
A plane crash on a quick flight from Sarasota to Peter Knight Airport on Davis Islands. McCord and fellow wrestlers Gary Hart and Buddy Colt were hurt. Sadly, a fourth passenger, Bobby Shane, was killed, and it's something that sticks with McCord to this day.
What am I going to be doing 5 years from now? Forget that, no. I mean, that ended that, and I'm glad it did, because now, I mean, that's been a long time ago, but that's still my philosophy, you know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Nobody does.
After the crash and months of rehab, McCord came back to wrestling as Austin Idol, a name in the wrestling business that everyone knows. It was a second chance, and now in 2025, he works as a manager with the National Wrestling Alliance, which is something that keeps him going.
So really, this is just perfect for me. It's a great balance where I can still have plenty of me time and then still be involved with wrestling. So I'm a happy guy.
But with that second chance, he remembers, and he also doesn't take a single day for granted.
The old cliche is, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is all that matters. So it's all about the now. So that changed my perspective dramatically.
I'm Blake Phillips, Tampa Bay 28.
We were flying on a Cessna 173. Buddy Colt was the pilot. Austin Idol was sitting next to Buddy Colt, and Bobby Shane and I were sitting in the back. We got to Sarasota, and we saw some storm moving in across Tampa, and we radioed Tampa Control and asked if we would have any trouble, because we were on a visual flight plan. Buddy Colt was not an instrument-rated pilot. We wanted to know if we could beat the storm in, and he assured us we could. So as we approached Tampa, the weather had already moved in, and we were socked in a fog bank, cloud bank, whatever you want to call it. And we were just getting ready to turn around and go back to Sarasota when a guy from McNeil Air Force Base said, I can get you in, there's a break in the storm. Keep coming, keep coming. We're going in, we're not instrument. We only have a visual flight plan, and we're asking what is the ceiling. They said 15, 1,600 feet. So we're dropping down, we're dropping down, we're dropping down, and finally when we broke through the cloud cover, we were too high and off to the right. So we had to cut back out over the bay to make a new approach. And as we started the long, slow turn back out over the bay, apparently Buddy got vertigo, the pilot, and flew us at 180 miles an hour into Tampa Bay. When I heard Austin Idol scream, pull up, we're going to hit the water, I reached down and I popped my belt. Saved my life. Buddy sitting next to me, Bobby Shane, died on impact. I was thrown maybe 100 or so feet from the plane. Buddy Colt and Austin Idol sunk with the plane. When I came to the top of the water, I couldn't see anyone. And it was raining really hard. The water was really, really choppy. So way off in the distance, I saw a light. So I started swimming towards the light, and I swam a while, and I came up on Austin Idol. And I asked him, I said, where's Buddy, where's Bobby, have you seen them? No, he said. I said, come on, I can walk now. You know, the water was low tide, so I said, come on, let's walk. He said, I can't walk, I have no feet. So I laid on my back and hooked him with my right arm, and my left wrist and arm were broke, but at the time I didn't know it. And I did the backstroke until I got him into the seawall. And when I got him up to the seawall, I heard Buddy Colt screaming out in the bay. And I swam back out, and I got Buddy, and Buddy's leg was a compound fracture, only hanging on by the tendons at this time. So I brought Buddy back in, and then I said to them, I'm going to go try to find Bobby, because I'd found them too, but I couldn't find Bobby. So I went back out. I don't know for how long. I was hollering at for Bobby, and I couldn't find him. So I was hoping that he had made it ashore, or was still okay. And when I got back to the seawall, because I was pretty messed up, I had 180 stitches, cut my nose off, blinded me in this eye here, broke my wrist, broke my arm, fractured my clavicle, compound break in my lower leg, and some vertebrae in my back. And I was getting sort of weak, so I decided maybe, go try to get some help. And the thing was, it was low tide, and there was a ladder that coming off the boat ramp was where the light was at. Buddy Colt and Austin Idol let me crawl up on their back so I could crawl the ladder to reach the ladder. And I crawled out, and there was a boat there, and I dropped the boat into the water for them. And then I went to the house close by, and I started kicking on the door. Believe this, I was totally naked. The impact knocked off my shoes, my socks, my pants, my shirt, everything. I was totally nude, full of blood, my head from here all the way down here, wide open. You could see the skull. And the elderly couple came to the door, and they saw this sight of this guy, standing there naked, full of blood, and they panicked, and they said, you better get out of here, we're going to call the police. You better get out of here, we're going to call the police. So I said, good, somebody's coming. So I went back down, and I talked to Buddy and Austin. I told them the help's on the way. Then I said, I better not take a chance. So I was pretty clear-headed. I didn't have any pain at the time either, which is odd. So I went back to the house, and I kicked the door in. I wanted to make sure that the police were coming. And then I went and sat under a tree and waited for the ambulance to get there. And then they took me to the hospital. And then sometime after maybe an hour in the hospital, I passed out, and I was out for like 3 days. So it was a horrendous thing. Horrendous. But I made it, you know what I mean?
Captain Colt, we talked about this last week on the phone, just us, we can laugh about it now because you lived.
Yeah.
But you were in the plane crash. Buddy Colt was flying the plane. You were in the plane crash that killed.
Billy, I had to correct you because you're usually right on it. He was trying to fly.
He was trying to fly the plane.
Did you have that one word, flying? It's a difference maker.
But Bobby Shane, who was called the Boy Wonder in wrestling, and who's the guy who gave Lawler his first crown and was the original king of wrestling, and was a tremendous worker, and was destined, and was already getting involved in booking, and was in with Barnett and destined for great things, and probably would have been a name in wrestling for the next 30 years. He was killed in that plane crash, and you were on the plane, and Buddy Colt was flying. Who else was on the plane?
Gary Hart.
That's right, because Gary obviously had injuries that plagued him in one respect or another for the physically for the rest of his life. But can you tell us about what happened?
The crash itself?
The crash itself.
Yeah, it's a Wednesday, and booked in Miami. And Miami was a long haul from Tampa, like 275 miles. So it's a long round trip. And, I'm making a couple bucks. So I thought, I'm flying commercial. So I'll spend the night in Miami, get a hotel, and fly back the next day and save the wear and tear of my body, So I was booked on Delta, and that's where I was going. It was a beautiful day, February, and
Gary, we both lived in the same apartment building. He said, "Hey, how are you going to Miami?" I said, "I'm flying commercial, flying Delta." He said, "Why don't you fly with us? I'll be riding with Buddy Colt. It's Buddy be flying. He's a very competent pilot." Quoting Gary, very competent pilot, and Bobby Shane and myself said, "We have an open seat. Why don't you do that? It'll cost you like $40, $50, and you'll be home the same night." And I said, "No, I'm gonna stick with my game plan, Gary. I'm gonna go commercial, you know." And throughout this conversation started in the morning, and then it kind of it progressed and evolved a little bit more as we're getting closer to the afternoon. And finally, you know, Gary had asked me 2 or 3 times, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to, you know, cancel my reservation of Delta, and I'll fly down with them. So we did. Everything was fine going down, perfect, beautiful weather. Coming back from Miami, we're flying back, beautiful skies, it's perfect. And it was around Sarasota, which is about 50 miles from Tampa. The weather started getting funky and funkier and funkier. And the flight controller there at Tampa International told Buddy that Tampa International, where we had departed from, was closed due to weather, but that he could get in at Peter O'Knight Airport, which was a little private airport right off of Davis Island. It's an island, Davis Island, surrounded by water, you know. And so Buddy opted to go that route. Matter of fact, we had a little discussion about it. Hey guys, we can either do that or we can turn around and go back to Sarasota where the weather's still okay, and we'll rent a car and go back. That's what I wanted to do, and that was my vote. Let's just go back to Sarasota, you know, play it safe. But I was outvoted. So anyway, as we got closer to Peter O'Knight, the weather really started digressing. I mean, it's foggy, rain, didn't look good. Buddy's not instrument rated, you know, just visual, VFR. The flight controller, Peter O'Knight, trying to bring him in. And, you know, it's a recipe for disaster, which it was. And on his first approach to the runway, he was too high. So he had to pull back, just not that much, but enough. So he had to pull back and bank over the residential area, which is very affluent neighborhood. And as he was banking over the residential neighborhood, now he's over the water to make that second approach. And I think he just lost, you know, every sense of where he was, lost airspeed, I'm sure. And
you can't see, right? He's just disoriented. You can't see anything. He wasn't instrument rated. It was visual only. So he was like, you're flying blind is the phrase.
In the dark, totally in the dark. And you know what? It was dead silent in that plane. Everybody knew this is not good. The next thing I know, Jimmy, I saw whitecaps, the water. I mean, that was it. I saw whitecaps, and then bang. Yeah, and I was just really lucky to get out of that. I should be dead, you know. Probably there's a few people out there wish I were, but
hey.
Probably more than a few.
I guess Gary, he had, I guess all of his teeth were knocked out, and he had multiple lacerations, and he had injuries that. You know, Gary was a wrestler originally before he got into managing, and physically that took a toll on him. And you know, and obviously, you know, Buddy Colt, that was his retirement, his injuries. He never wrestled again. But Shane, I mean, you know, I've heard the story. I'm not even going to try to tell it, but the God Almighty, and you know the way I am about flying. You know that, but. What was it like?
I've heard.
What was it like trying because I heard Gary tell the story, and I always like to fly with Gary because how many people been in 2 plane crashes, right? I figured I was
exactly
safe there. But the trying to find and rescue Shane was just a horrifying story.
Yeah, it really was. First of all, I mean, for me, when I had a very difficult time getting out of I was riding shotgun, and I couldn't get out of my seatbelt. I guess maybe the water, the salt water, boom, it just froze up on me. I couldn't get it. I'm going down into the fuselage. I'm sinking, and because it did float for just a little bit. It would not much, but as the plane's starting to sink, I'm thinking, oh man, you've survived this plane crash, and now you're going to drown. And I had cowboy boots on at the time. And somehow, and you got the foot rudders, the pedals there on the passenger side too, up front. And my feet were jammed underneath those pedals because they were just, I guess, just crushed down on my feet. Somehow or another, I got out of my boots. I wiggled out of my boots, and I got out of that seatbelt, and I came to the surface of the water, and it was dead silent. I mean, I could hear water. I could hear water. That's all I could hear, And at that moment, I thought, everybody's dead. You're alive.
Oh.
Yeah, I really thought everybody was dead. And so I yelled out, is everybody okay? Nothing. Is everybody okay? Nothing. Then finally on the next one, is everybody okay? Then I heard Buddy Colt say, I'm over here. Then I heard Gary say, hey, I'm over here. And our voices were, I mean, we were pretty separated, from the impact of this thing. But there was no Bobby. But I do know that since I just came out of that fuselage, they got thrown out. Maybe they didn't have their seatbelts on. Probably didn't. I don't know, or they broke, whatever. But I knew that the fuselage was right below me, and I didn't hear Bobby's voice, and I called out for Bobby a couple of times, nothing. So I took a couple of dives down, but they were futile. I mean, it's dark, the water's cold, you're traumatized, and Bobby he went down with the deal, strapped in.
That was the story, right? That he hadn't gotten out of his seatbelt, that he was still strapped in when they found him, right?
Well, that's true, but nobody really knows if he drowned or if he was killed on impact.
Yeah.
I never really got any clarification on that one, but he couldn't swim. I know that. Bobby couldn't swim, and he was terrified of water.
That you don't make me want to fly anymore.
Come on, I'll call Buddy.
Already.
I'll call Buddy. You know,
yeah, Captain Colt. Well, that's why they call it the terminal. We were talking about that last week, but no, it had to be. That was one of the most and one of the most horrifying instances of anybody ever in wrestling, to be put in that position in the middle of the night, dark, cold water, in a plane crash, trying to get out. I know Gary had told me that he staggered and swam, and his I guess he had obviously multiple injuries and trying to get out on the shore and etc. When it made a lot of news
it did.
It was because obviously the guys were, celebrities, and everybody knew who you guys were. And it was a huge news thing. But while Iron Mike McCord basically died in that plane crash.
Yeah.
The true world. A lot of guys, because of working TV, would go commercial, get good fares on United back then, and be able to spend the night and still come home with money in your pocket, kind of break the week up. Or what some of us often did was to charter a private plane so we could go and get back the same night. And so we went to Miami that night, and I remember it was a private plane with Bob Roop, Dick Burdick, and myself, with some beer in a small plane that only seated 4 people with a pilot. Like you had to be overweight. And I remember as we were about to leave Miami, that Buddy Colt had his plane, and some of the guys were with him so that they could get back from Miami that night. And I remember looking out the window, and they kind of taxied slowly by us And I remember seeing Bobby Shane's face in the window. He made eye contact with me, and I remember him waving his hand at me. And they took off a couple of minutes ahead of us. And as we were flying, as often happens, a squall came through, and just the rain, horrific rain for that small storm as it moves through. So Murdoch had some beer, we're sitting there just enjoying the time. We had a great house in Miami, and we're gonna get home that night. And, because it's a small plane and we had hired a pilot, so we're hearing the radio transmissions. And I remember the tower saying to our pilot, we have 456 BC, which I immediately was Buddy Colt's plane, on final, but we never got confirmation, of their landing. So when you guys land, just confirm 456 BC and radio that to us too. Again, never thought another thing. A minute or two goes by, the tower comes on. We get 456 BC. We have a report that they're down in the bay with casualties. You could have heard a pin drop in that plane. And your mind starts going crazy about what you're going to face. And I remember the pilot's team in rain, he's getting the coordinates coming in. We had started on a small private airport inland from Tampa. The weather that came in closed, that airport closed Tampa International. And the only way you could land was Peter O'Knight on that little peninsula was still open. And that's where the Colt was going to land. And we're dead silent when that thing came through, forget 456 BC, reported down in the bay. And we came through and our pilots listened intensely to the instructions, and we couldn't see the ground. All of a sudden we broke through the clouds, and it was as clear as if we were sitting in this room right here. And the cloud cover was seemed like where this ceiling was. Like a cold thing of clouds, and just as clear to the runway. So we land, and I guess some people were listening to the police radios that the wrestlers supposedly had a plane crash, so fans jumped in their cars, and someone came over, and we're already there. When we landed, they thought maybe we were going to crash at the airport. And so when we got out, we didn't have our cars. They were inland at that small airport, so some fans said, we'll give you a ride to your cars. And as we went around the peninsula, which you had to drive from the tip to get back to the mainland, we could see flashing red lights. And we stopped, and Dick Murdoch and I got out, and the bay was to our left, and the waters were choppy, and it was like a drizzling rain, and it was pitch dark, and there was two houses. And as we went to walk between the houses, Buddy Colt was laying on the lawn. And as we looked down, his one ankle was grotesquely not at an angle that the ankle should have been. We knew he was hurt. And the paramedics had got there right about a minute or two before us. And because of Buddy Colt's size, they couldn't figure out a way to get him onto the gurney to get him into an ambulance. So Dick Murdoch and I got down and inched our arms underneath his trunk of his body and locked hands. And we physically lifted Buddy Colt off the ground far enough that they could slide a thing between them to get him on. And there was a helicopter searching with a searchlight looking for the wreckage, which they couldn't find the drizzling rain. And finally, what had happened was Gary Hart had already gone to the hospital. And the tide was down. When the plane went down, they were all thrown, and Gary Hart bobbed up in the water looking around. He and Buddy Colt, as injured as Buddy was, made their way, and Gary helped Buddy get up the storm ladder with the tide out to where he could get up on the grass in the back of the house that actually belonged to a doctor who didn't speak any English. And so Buddy crawled between, and Gary Hart went up and banged on the back patio window. And you think, if you were a doctor that didn't speak English, and somebody was banging on your back window in the dead of night, nothing behind them but the bay, a lot of people would have come with a gun and maybe not asked any questions. And this doctor opened, and here was Gary Hart, because he had a wound on his head covered with blood. And we called for help, and he had already gone to the hospital, and we got there and helped Buddy Colt out. Bobby Shane was still unaccounted for. So there was nothing more that we could do. And I was going back to Houston the next day. I was just moving in from the territory. And I remember going to the sportatorium for TV, and a couple of the paramedics, or a couple of the emergency rescue people came in, and they had found Bobby Shane. They found the wreckage of the plane. One engine was here, one engine was there. The canopy part was all gone. The engine looked like the Great Hulk had gone in there and taken all the instruments, wires and everything, and just yanked them out. And he said there was Bobby Shane still strapped in his seat. And the guy said, I know you're going to hear stories about him, you know, just in a panic trying to pull that seatbelt loose so he could get out, and then he drowned. And he said, I've made enough rescues in situations like that that I can tell you, in all honesty, because he was a friend of yours, that when we saw him, his arms were floating up in the air. And from doing that kind of rescues before, we knew that he was knocked out on impact and never suffered and drowned. And he said we cut the seatbelt, grabbed him by the belt, and just floated him out. And so it was a sad day to have lost Bobby Shane, but it also was peace to his family to know that if he was gone, that he suffered. It didn't suffer. It was not unconscious. And so that's I've relived that moment God knows how many times. And I see Buddy Colt saw today, and it's the kind of thing that, because you hear stories about somebody that survived something, and then questions about why am I alive, and somebody like Bobby Shane didn't make it. So it's not something that we talk about. We remember that night when Murdoch and I picked Jeff up now. We don't even have that conversation. I don't know if he thinks about it. I think about it, but I never want to say something. But Bobby Shane was going to come in, and we were all excited he was coming in to be the booker. And I was his tag team partner the night before, and after the match in Miami, he died in that crash. And Harley Race came in and took over with no notice and accepted responsibilities. I stayed there, and that was the era where we knew Roger Kirby very well. Roger and I teamed up and became part of the tag title. So it was a wonderful year in one respect, and also a sad year as to how we got in that position, how Harley was the booker, and how we sadly lost Bobby Shane.
And we're going to talk about the plane crash that you were actually there. You didn't witness the crash, but you were there after the crash to help some of these guys out. That's what we're here to talk about today, because, you know, I went back and I looked through Gary Hart's book, and I'm sure there's some embellishment here, not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, not trying to hurt his son's feelings, who is a great guy, and, you know, he loved his dad. But I think even Austin Idol said, you know, some of these injuries that Gary Hart wrote about here weren't necessarily as bad as Gary. Not you know, Bobby Shane passed away. That's fact. And some of these injuries were pretty bad. They did happen, but maybe Gary added to them, if that's fair to say. But that's what we're here today. We're going to talk about not necessarily what those guys remember, but what you remember from the other end, being there at the bay after the plane crash and seeing these guys in this terrible accident.
Okay.
So what I want to do, if it's okay with you, Bob, is I'm not going to read directly out of Gary's book, but I did take some notes here, just very briefly. And I'm not going to get into what you saw or anything that happened after the crash. I'm just going to discuss what happened to lead to the crash that fateful night there. We go back actually to February 19th, 1975. You guys finished up a show in Miami. I'm assuming you were there as well.
Yes.
Now, after the matches, I guess it's reported that Shane Colt, Austin Idol, and Gary Hart, they left the arena. They went out to go get something to eat somewhere called Wolfie's, according to Gary Hart. Not sure if you remember that place. But they decide they're going to ride a plane to the next town, over to Tampa. It's Buddy Colt flying the plane, single engine, to go back to Tampa Bay. So Buddy's flying the plane. He's got Austin Idol up next to him in the front, and in the back behind them, Gary Hart and Bobby Shane. I guess the story goes, Buddy asked them if they wanted to go to Sarasota because there was reportedly going to be a storm in Tampa that night, but they spoke to somebody and they said, no, you'll be clear, just come on through. And they decide, okay, we're headed off to Tampa Bay. And the story from there goes, by the time they got to Tampa, everything was foggy. There was a little bit of a storm maybe there. And there were issues. Apparently, at least according to Austin Idol, Buddy Colt was only visually trained to fly a plane. He wasn't meter rated, which means he didn't really know how to read all the meters there, all the gadgets. So he was actually getting talked through how to land here because he couldn't really read the meter deal. So apparently they tried to land on first approach, and at least according to Austin Idol, they were just a little too high to make the landing. So they had to go back around and try it a second time. And that's when I guess Idol realized, according to Gary Hart's book, Idol was the one that shouted out, "Pull up! You're going to hit the water." And Idol he hasn't said that part, but he said that he did see the Whitecaps, and then boom, they crashed into the water. We're going to get into what you saw after that, and then I'll tell like Gary Hart's version, Austin Idol's version. We're going to see what jives and what doesn't. But at this point, Gary Hart does say in his book that the first person he sees is Bob Roop's girlfriend. So I'll let you take it from there and tell me how she got there or how she heard about it, how you got there, and you can just tell the entire story from here. And then after you're done, we'll look at their version.
Well, we knew we were behind Buddy Colt's plane. By the way, it was a twin engine, and he was not qualified yet to fly twin engines. He was also not qualified to take passengers, but that somehow made it by. And Buddy's gone. I don't want to bring any grief to him, but we were behind them. And when we did get up to near Sarasota, we had been told we were going to have to land. We were going to have to land in Sarasota because the fog was so bad in Tampa that there was no place to land. The fog was too low. So, but once we got up near Sarasota, they said, well, let's open up. Now, Buddy had flown those guys from Tampa to Miami, and now he's bringing them back.
Yeah, I think the only difference was Austin Idol wasn't in the initial flight up. Gary Hart actually talked him into taking this flight back down to Tampa.
Okay. Yeah, well, I didn't know any of the details about that.
No, yeah, I knew you weren't involved in any of that. I just want to, give everybody kind of an idea of what was going on. And also, I think it was Tampa International was closed. So they were told they had to go, if they wanted to land at all, they had to go to Peter O'Knight, which is like a private airport or something like that.
Oh, man. Yeah, it was a little bitty, there's a little island type thing.
That's what Idol said. It was an island.
Yeah, and the runway is real short. Untrained pilots should not be maybe taking off, but not landing on that thing, especially at night.
In the fog.
Yeah. Well, the fog had lifted enough that once you got probably below 100. But, now here is the problem of knowing how having fog until you get down to 100 feet. And by not being able to read the meter and the distance, all the gauges that tell you where you are, juxtaposition with the airport, that when you come out of the fog, you're too high and the runway's right there. You're not going to. Now, a skilled pilot, Ronnie Garvin, for example, could have made it. He would have just done it, scared the hell out of everybody by doing it look like he was going to do a dive to get himself lower. And like he was going to do a dive, like you think he's going to crash the plane, and then he'd pull it up, but he'd lose 100 feet or whatever in a few seconds. But Buddy Colt didn't have the expertise to do that. Anyway, we were behind him, and when we got to the airport, what I saw my van. I had a Ford Econoline or something like that, non-glamorous vehicle, and my girlfriend would come to pick me up, and I see the van is tearing across a field. There's roads, but there's a flat field. Instead of being on the road, the van is tearing, I assume she's driving, it's tearing across this field back towards the airport, which is just a little bitty place. So we landed and get out, and she runs up and she said, the plane crashed out there. I don't know if she told me it was Buddy Colt's plane, but anyway, I jumped in the van and assumed if Buddy's plane wasn't there at the airport, so I assumed it was him. So jumped back in the van, and I was driving, but she directed me. tore back over there, and she showed me where she had seen the guys coming up to the dock, but she was too small to pull them out. Coming up to the seawall was about 3 feet high, but it was smooth at the top. It was cement or concrete, and it was smooth at the top. There wasn't anything you could grab, even if you could get up high enough. There wasn't anything you could grab to pull yourself out, like a handhold, and there were no steps or anything. Now, there was a dock about 40 or 50 feet down, but when I got there, all four of the guys, nobody was on land yet. They were all in the water, and I immediately started pulling them out. And I don't remember, I think I pulled Gary out first because he looked the worst. And, when I pulled him out, I had I believe his right arm with my right arm. And then I pulled the rest of the guys out. And McCord was, you just had the toe. And so, he was able to help me a little bit once I got him up close enough to the seawall or up over the lip. He could help himself out. Colt needed help because his ankle was bad. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Bobby was not there. But once I pulled Hart out, he was still laying, was up like on an elbow. And I noticed that he was bleeding pretty heavily from his head. It was dripping down on the, I could see it. I had a searchlight type light on by my driver's side window that I had aimed down there, so he had some light down there. And I could see the blood dripping off him. And I asked him, "Is there anybody? Who else was with you?" He said, "Well, Shane." So, where is he? Well, we don't know. So I went. I mean, I'm only standing about 2 feet from the seawall. So I look out towards the bay. I mean, I don't remember how dark it was, but I didn't. I couldn't see anything really. So I thought about it for a minute, about maybe going in and trying to see about seeing if I could find him. So if he was in the water, he would be gone. He would have drowned by now. So but I still thought about it. And now I read the paper back then. I knew about sharks in Tampa Bay. A lot of passenger ships and ships that come in there dump their refuse, their garbage, and a lot of food in their garbage, and the sharks just are there. They've got free food just coming out of those ships all the time. So they don't even have to hunt for it. It just comes floating down to them. So I wasn't real thrilled about the idea. But about that time, Hart's pointing out he's out that way. And again, he's up on one elbow and he can see the water. He's looking out towards the water. And we hear the splashing noise. And I looked down and all I saw was, it looked like a board coming up out of the water. And it was a hammerhead shark. And, you always exaggerate these things. I'm going to cut it in like a third and say it had this hammer type head, like a board at the front end of the shark. It's got to be at least 3 feet wide. And it's got big eyeballs, like about the size of 50 cent pieces at each end of it. And it rolls up with one of those eyeballs looking up at us. And then it went back down, and the rest of its body kind of came up and went down. The thing had to be 10 to 12 feet long. Well, I wasn't going in the water with that thing there. I think about it. But Gary was bleeding profusely from his head, and I think from a wound somewhere on his body. McCord still had to bleed like crazy because it's real vascular down there. You've got a lot of veins going into your feet, to keep them.
I think you touched on that last week, but clarify to everybody out there the injury that you saw on Austin Idol.
Well, it would be like somebody took a sharp, small ice cream scoop shark and just gouged out about 3/4 of his big toe, the bottom of his big toe.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a big hole there.
Yeah.
It did go all the way through. I mean, there was, you could see, but I mean, it was still bleeding.
Right.
He had to bleed so those guys left a trail of blood behind them while they were swimming, strangling, however they got back there. Mm-hmm. And they're there in the water. And I mean, I'm not saying I saved them, but I know that shark was there within a minute after I got there. And if they'd been in the water, I can't imagine it wasn't going to try to get a meal out of somebody.
Right.
McCord bleeding, Gary Hart bleeding. But, I talked to Gary, and my understanding is his own version of it, that he had all kinds of broken things.
Well,
if they did,
I know he had some injuries. He said he didn't realize he had them until after this was all over with. Obviously, there's a lot of adrenaline and other things going on at this point, I'd have to think. But yeah, I mean, I know he did suffer some back injuries because he never walked the same again. He couldn't take a bump anymore, not a real bump anyway. So there were some injuries there for certain. But, you know, his main thing, and I don't want to say this like the other injury, like a back injury isn't worse, but the main thing that was noticeable that you talked about that Gary mentioned too was he was lacerated everywhere on his head. He said his nose, the tip of his nose was, you know, kind of sliced open. But I guess it took like over 200 stitches to close him up because he had so many different lacerations because he was actually ejected, thrown from the plane because he said as soon as he heard Austin Idol say we're going to crash, he unbuckled. So when the plane crashed, Gary was the one that got tossed from the plane. Like Austin Idol, he was stuck in there and he was stuck in his seatbelt and he had to like force himself out of his seatbelt. And when he did that, I guess the front end of the plane had smashed down. And the rudders, that's what you talked about, Buddy Colt's ankle or his foot or whatever. It was the rudders that got wrapped around it and smashed into Austin Idol's ankles and Buddy Colt's ankles. So that's kind of where Austin wiggled out of his cowboy boots, he says, and got his, you know, his foot torn, his toe torn. And that's how Buddy Colt got the, you know, the injury to his ankle as well, was when they were trying to get out of the plane. But Gary Hart, you know, by all accounts from everybody involved, he was thrown from the plane.
Well, that's interesting because I heard a different version.
Okay.
I heard the version was that when Buddy came out of the fog and was preparing to land, he saw that he was too high. So instead of landing, he might have even gotten down much lower and close to the runway. And then, you know, so now he sees he's halfway down it. He hadn't touched down yet, that he's going to run out of runway. So he puts the gas pedal down and takes off again.
Right.
And my understanding was that when he circled around to come back for a second try, he was deliberately keeping the plane low because that way, you know, he wouldn't have to make that descent.
Yeah.
He could come in and he could see the runway much better. He could come in and be much closer to it.
Right.
But his mistake was that when he turned to circle back, when you turn and where you're say at a 45-degree angle, your wings lose lift. I mean, what keeps the plane aloft is wind under the wings and on top of them too. The one that goes over the top has a suction effect of pulling up, and the wind that goes underneath has an uplifting effect. So when he turned, you know, he should have taken a big wide turn where he didn't actually bank his wings at all. He kept them level, especially when you're 100 feet off the water. But he turned, and when he did, he lost lift. And when he lost lift, the plane just fell into the bay. Mm-hmm. And my understanding was that it fell in upside down. And Gary hurt his head so bad by falling through the top of the plane.
He said he went through the plane. I mean, I'm just going off of, I wasn't there. I can only go off of what they said. I've seen Gary say that he was thrown from the plane. I've seen Austin Idol say it, but Idol he didn't see where any of these guys went. He found these guys after the crash. So obviously nobody even realized Bobby Shane was still in the plane until after the fact. So it's not like Austin saw it, so maybe he's going off of what Gary said or whatever too, but according to Gary, he was thrown from the plane. I mean, he didn't make it, you know, like a big deal or anything like that. So it just sounded like, you know, that was potentially what happened there.
I think the only two doors were up front. So I don't know how he'd be thrown. Well, it's your story. That's the thing. With wrestlers, it's your story. You can tell it any way you want to. I just know what I heard at the time.
Right.
Was that the plane basically fell into the bay. The Buddy turned too sharp and the wings lost their lift and the plane fell out of the sky.
Well,
and
God bless Gary Hart, you know, and he's gone now. And again, I'm not trying to attack him at all because, great mind, great for the business and all that good stuff. But, you know, there's a part of this story too, where he's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Forrest Gump, where they're at war there and Forrest keeps running back in and pulling another man out, going back in and pulling another man out, you know, and that's kind of how Gary tells this story here too, is he got Austin Idol, he pedaled him to the wall. Then he went back and got Buddy Colt and took him to the wall. Then he kind of went back and he searched for Bobby Shane, but he couldn't find him. So he finally gave up. And that seemed a little bit much, I thought, you know, and I don't think Austin Idol tells the story exactly that way either. Though Idol did admit out of everybody, you know, that made it out of there, that Gary Hart probably was the most capable of actually, getting around on his feet because, Idol had the foot rip, but his ankles were also injured. And then Buddy Colt, obviously, you've talked about that on the last episode. You talked about it a couple times now, his leg injury, his ankle injury.
Well, there's another factor involved. Gary still had a sport coat. He always wore a sport coat or a suit coat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Still had, I don't know why, he still had his coat on when he showed up at the wall. When I pulled him out, he still had his coat on. So I don't know why he didn't take it off, because, you try not to drown. Another factor, and again, it's Gary's story. God bless Gary. Rest in peace, Gary. I was one of his Gary Hart's army. I was one of the army, and I like Gary because Gary knew the office hold. He was smart to the business, so I could talk to him. He was educational. He could give me tips and things.
Right.
So I admired it. I admired him as a manager. I thought he was really good. So I would go see him when he was hurt. I went to see him at his house, and all I remember is he came to the door. In fact, he got paranoid. He had an emotional reaction to the stress. He got PTSD really bad immediately, and he had a reaction to it. Where by 3 days after the crash, he had a Thompson submachine gun sitting on a little table right behind his front door.
I remember you saying that, yeah.
Yeah, and I knocked on his door. When I come over to see how he's doing, I knocked on his door one day, and he came and, I heard about 3 locks unlock, and he opened it up, and I walked in, and he had that machine gun across the on the table, and I asked him what that was for, and he had some idea that the office was out to get him.
Could and again, medication maybe too, though, huh?
Could have been. It could have been the PTSD.
I was including that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly.
That kind of stress can create all kind. And yes, you added good call on the medication too. That could have added to it because he seemed very, just totally unreasonable. The office didn't have any desire to get him.
Right.
He thought they were mad at him because, they couldn't. Shane gone completely. Hart basically gone, and he can't come to work anytime soon. Buddy Colt gone. I crippled the heel side of the promotion.
Right.
And so he was convinced the office was mad at him, was going to get him somehow. That's what the gun was for. And how do you talk to someone who's thinking like that?
Right.
You can't tell them all day long that, well, I don't know what you possibly be thinking about, Gary. I don't think that's the case, but when people want to believe what they think they believe, that's what they're going to do.
I wanted to go through some more of this with you,
okay.
Because the version you tell is nowhere near the version that Gary Hart tells. And so I'm not calling Gary Hart a liar, and I'm certainly not calling you a liar, Bob, because the way you tell this is very matter of fact, very, you seem to tell a total recall here, the situation, as anybody should be able to remember these things. I'm totally on board with what's going on here. You've talked about that wall, that
seawall,
the seawall. Sorry, I don't live on a coast. So you talked about the sea.
That's fine.
You talked about the seawall and them not being able to get it. And that's where, this is where now the little things, the injuries and stuff, no big deal. People remember things differently. Maybe you can embellish that a little bit when you're telling a good story. And I'm not making light of their injuries. This was very serious. Bobby Shane died in this crash. But I'm just saying some of the things that Gary Hart say here. Austin Idol even said, "Oh, I wasn't that messed up, darling. But, I did have this going on." But I want to go back to this just real quick because this is where the big difference lays in this whole thing. And that's what I wanted to flush out. Is Gary Hart says that they, as you talked about them going towards the seawall, it was because they saw a light. So they kind of knew which way to swim. And they kind of swam their way over there. And this is where the story really differs because Gary Hart says he pulled himself out of the water onto a dock. Maybe the dock you're referring to that's, 50 feet away, whatever you said it was. And he said that he saw a house and he went to the house. And this is funny because you said he was in his suit jacket still. Gary Hart swears he was buck naked as he went to this person's house. And he banged on their door until they said they were going to call the cops. So he banged more because that's what he wanted him to do, was call the police. Then he went back and kind of slumped under a tree and just yelled to the other guys that help was on the way. And that's how he remembered it. But the next thing he says is the first person he sees after that is your girlfriend. So clearly, if you guys are there, maybe there's, a little more to this. But Austin Idol has even went back, and I don't know if he's just going along with Gary's story or whatever, but he too talks about Gary getting out of the water first. So, but you say, hey, we were there, and even Gary Hart puts your girlfriend there, which I guess would put you there. So it's just really weird that I get somebody trying to play the hero, or maybe they do remember things a little differently or whatever, but it's such a drastic difference. I pulled him out of the water versus Gary Hart pulled himself out of the water and then, basically saved the day. So that's where I wanted to get into that a little bit here. So I'm happy, that you broke it down the way you remembered it, the way, how it's probably the way it was. I'm going to have to say you helped Gary out. You talked about the injuries. Austin Idol, obviously, you said he helped himself out a little bit there because he wasn't injured in the upper body department. And then obviously Buddy Colt out and he suffered his injuries as well. So I just wanted to touch on that. And then I have like two other things here I wanted to run by you and get your take.
Okay, let me rebut a little.
Yeah.
When Gary was, after he knocked on the door and got the cops on the way, and he slumped down under a bush or whatever, where were Colt and McCord?
I guess
still in the water?
They were resting at the dock, I guess, in the water. Yes, that's Gary's, because he couldn't pull them out or whatever. Or maybe he did pull them out and put them on the dock. I don't remember that part of the book, but I don't remember exactly what. I just remember him saying that he banged on the door. He was butt naked. They said they were calling the police, which is what he wanted. Then he went and slumped under a tree and he yelled he told the guys that, help was on the way. And that's the last thing he remembered until he saw your girlfriend.
Well, when Debbie, my girlfriend, came driving up, the reason she was driving so fast was because she had seen him at the dock. I mean, at the seawall.
Okay.
Not the dock, it's a seawall, and couldn't get out. That's why she was in such a hurry. She was worried they were going to drown. That's why we tore back over there. And I never did see another adult there, like some of the homeowner or something.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that if the police did come, and I don't remember, I'm sure the ambulances came. I don't remember that part. Maybe once somebody got there, I just went ahead and left because there wasn't much I could do. I mean, Gary he wasn't, his head was busted open, and McCord had the toe. Buddy's ankle, there was no way his ankle wasn't like twisted sideways or anything. It wasn't dislocated or, you couldn't tell how bad it was. The bad injury to his ankle was done by the doctor who tried to repair it. He cut it open and Barry got a terrible infection and got gangrene. That's what happened to his ankle. It wasn't from the initial injury.
Right. I remember you talking about that last episode. Yeah.
And I don't want to, what I said earlier about Gary's frame of mind, about thinking that the office was out to get him and everything. Let's extrapolate on that about what the actual shock of you're sitting in a plane, getting ready to land, all of a sudden you go through the top of the plane, you're in the water, and you have, immediately save your own life, regardless of whether you're thinking about anybody else or not, and trying to get out of there. I'm sure they had to be thinking about sharks too. I mean, here it is night, you're splashing, you're bleeding, you're making all kinds of noise like a wounded fish. I'm sure that was all on his mind. And then once he saw that big shark, he let out a scream. I'm telling you, he screamed like a woman who, was being attacked or something.
Right. That's another funny thing, because he specifically says in his book that there's a lot of lore about sharks being in the water at that point in time, but he said there wasn't any sharks in the water at that time, which I kind of find hard to believe. There's just sharks in the water anyway out in that Tampa Bay area, at least back in those days, from things I've read and whatnot. But I mean, the two things you don't do in the water, is bleed and flail your feet. That's going to attract the sharks for certain.
And especially both at the same time. Yeah.
Right. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, the report I got I talked to the air sea rescue people, and there were so many sharks around the plane, they couldn't go down to get
Bobby
Shane's body until daylight.
Wow.
So yeah, because it was it's one thing. I mean, sharks are tolerable if you can see them, and also they wanted to let any lingering trace of the blood in the water to get out of there, where the sharks would not have anything to. Because my understanding was Shane wasn't bleeding. But, why don't we go with, it's his story, he can tell it any way he wants to, and that goes for me too. I do remember it that way, and I mean, I do remember pulling all three of those guys out of the water. And because I was shocked at when I first saw Gary, his head, I could see his head was cut up. I said a few minutes ago about going to see Gary at his apartment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he came to the door and answered the door. Like, I mean, he's got a busted knee, a hip, and back, and all that. And again, perhaps some of these injuries come on or came on later. I don't want to diss Gary because like I said before, I respected him. I liked him.
You've done nothing but put Gary over here as far as, being good for the business, and you kind of hung out with him a little bit here and there outside of the business as well. Nothing crazy, but you said, you would go over to his apartment or whatnot, which is not something you did with too many of the guys. So
no.
Yeah, so you've done nothing but say good things about Gary Hart, and it's not like Gary Hart says anything negative about you in the story. It's just, well, you're kind of omitted, although your girlfriend was there, right? So that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
But you got to figure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Gary's a good guy, and again, he can tell a story any way he wants to.
Let's talk about the injuries real quick here, and then we'll go and we'll discuss anything else you want to about this or anything else here before we close up the show. But I just wanted to re-verify to everybody everything that happened here in this plane crash. Now, obviously, the obvious one is Bobby Shane passes away. Story goes, again, at least according to Gary Hart's book, because he felt terrible about the whole thing himself as well, that some of the boys or whomever, maybe Eddie Graham, I'm not sure who it was, they actually went and got a coroner report to show to Gary Hart so we'd stop feeling terrible that, there was nothing else that they could do to help. According to him, there was very little actual water in the lungs of Bobby Shane, that it was like blunt force trauma almost when they crashed into the water. He was basically dead on arrival, so he didn't really drown, consciously drown. At least that's what Gary printed in his book. But we do know one thing. Bobby Shane, sadly passed away in this situation. We know Buddy Colt never was able to wrestle. Well, he tried to wrestle a couple times after this, but he was never the same again, to say the least. His ankle, all sorts of issues. You say, it was from the surgery. The doctor screwed it up even worse than it actually was. Perhaps it could have been, repaired properly, but it was done incorrectly. And like you said last week, hopefully Buddy got some money out of that. Obviously, Austin Idol, he was down for a while. Now, you talked about, having the bottom of his toe and things ripped up. Gary Hart went a little further, said both of his feet, the bottoms were ripped off. Austin said, no, it wasn't that bad, but he did lose, basically, like you said, quite a bit. And you think about, well, toe's not that big, but it was a big giant hole in the bottom of his foot, guys. And, but also Austin did suffer some ankle injuries, verified, and it kept him out of action for like 6 months. And he came back and he tried to work a little bit, and he was, he missed a lot of the next year, but it wasn't too long after that he developed the Austin Idol persona. So it kind of worked out for him in the long run. And then, of course, there's Gary Hart. He never walked the same again. I'll say that much. He talks about having, I don't know about a broken back, but certainly some injuries to the back area. But obviously the main thing was, all the lacerations. He claims, went all the way, he could feel his skull or whatever, how he was busted wide open. It's possible. Certainly crashing a plane upside down into an ocean, that'll do it to you. Those are basically the injury situations. You talked about Buddy Colt's ankle, check. Bobby Shane, we know, passed away, check. Gary Hart, you say, you can't really see the other injury, so, you don't know, but obviously he was lacerated, check. And then I just wanted to verify also, you talked about Austin Idol having the foot ripped, but also, he suffered some serious ankle injuries, I guess, in that crash as well. But that was because of trying to get out of there, getting his legs smashed underneath some debris, I guess. But that's where we're at, guys. And you've heard the story for many years. Gary Hart saved the day, and Austin Idol's told his version of the story as well, which is not really anything crazy. Now we get Bob Roop's version, who was there. I mean, it's basically verified in Gary's book without actually saying your name, everything but saying your name. So, Bob, you were there in some way, shape, or form, no doubt.
Well, I've got a question. Whoever's telling, now think about all the different versions. Wrestlers love to tell stories. Now, you just talked a while ago about Flair giving a blow-by-blow description of being Slater when he wasn't within 50 miles of the place, And so wrestlers do that. So the amount of things that got told about that plane crash, I'm sure every wrestler on the card wanted to have some kind of story about it.
I've even read Gordon Soley's version of this. So there's quite a few different stories out there, right?
Right. So who knows who is correct or not? All I can talk about is what I saw and what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've been examining my own memory here and thinking, well, is there any way you could have embellished that? It's not a glorious story. But there's a guy dead in part of the story. I'm not real thrilled about that. They have to even talk about that. I couldn't even, go out there and try to see if the guy was still alive. I'm not real proud of that. But there's some holes and stuff. If this homeowner, you'd think by the time that the cops got there that he would be out there to see what was going on. And I don't remember ever seeing anybody from those homes. Yeah, but again, any story worth telling is worth embellishing. And by the way that they've been, including with me, I guess. Again, it's like I'm not the hero of the story at all, of my story. I was glad to be able to help. Maybe if I hadn't, maybe Murdoch would have been there to do it. Maybe they wouldn't have been attacked by a shark.
Gary does mention Dick Murdoch showing up, but I guess it was after the fact. Dickie got there after the ambulances got there, because I guess Murdoch arrived, according to Hart anyway, as the ambulance was getting ready to put Gary on there, and Murdoch actually went to the hospital with Gary from there. So Murdoch a little late getting there, but yeah, he was around there as well at the time.
Well, he would have had to walk over there, because when my girlfriend came up and yelled, "Get in," I got in. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Go back over there the way I came. There's guys in the water." Yeah, I don't think I was still there when Murdoch got there. I don't remember much after the ambulance people getting there.
Yeah. I get that. But yeah, I just, the details here, you're shining a spotlight in the water. It seems like it's, actual fact here. So I'm not questioning you at all, Bob. I buy your story more than the other one, and I'm not trying to knock anybody either. I wasn't there. I have no idea. I can only, listen to, the versions of the stories that are out there and go with what I believe. Yours seems very plausible. So I'll leave it at that. Some of these other ones sound like a movie. But
well, again, it's not, oh, look at me, because, again, we're talking about somebody dying that I couldn't even go out and try to help. I was sorry as hell it happened. It was a tragedy for, not just for Shane, but those other guys too. Of course, much worse for him, but for Bobby. But so again, what really happened down to the absolute details from the time that Buddy Colt went to turn around to bring the plane back around. Again, I heard it just fell out of the sky. Gary Hart went through the top of the plane because he had unfastened his seatbelt.
Okay.
Also heard that Bobby Shane, and I got this from one of the rescue guys. And again, this might have been third hand, where it was BS, but that Bobby was found. He had his hands under his seatbelt, like trying to get it loose.
Oh.
Now, it could have been he was trying to get it loose when the plane hit, and when he was knocked out, there was never any talk about massive head injury on him or anything. It could have been. But again, what actually happened in finite detail, I don't think we got to that tonight.
But I'd expect to get, the entire story here, but I certainly think you opened up a whole new can of worms for people to kind of process and let the listeners decide, what they want to believe. But when we talked about this originally off air, you were not trying to play the hero when you were talking to me about it. It was kind of a somber situation. You were just like, yeah man, I was there and I had to try to help him pull out. And I was like, what? In my mind, I didn't say this to you at the time, but I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Cause that is not what is in Gary Hart's book. I didn't say that to you, but that's what I was thinking. So it was like a whole new, wow, we gotta get this on air. Cause I wanted to hear your version of what went down because it sounded so real as opposed to some of the other stuff that's out there. So, no, I appreciate you, offering to talk about it here because, that's a situation that maybe not everybody wants to revisit. No matter what side of it that they're on, it's kind of hard to process. Even if you weren't one of the guys in the water, just being a part of that that can kind of screw up your psyche from any end. So,
yeah. And, to add something else too, it doesn't happen a lot, but, the wrestling business has its dangers to it, and there's been a bunch of guys killed on the road in car wrecks. Mm-hmm. And, and here's one from a plane crash. So, and there was another plane crash that paralyzed Johnny Valentine.
Right.
And, so there's dangers. There were dangers in pro wrestling. I guess there maybe isn't in any profession, but I don't know if you're working in an office, as an accountant or something. I don't know if you have the same kind of dangers that you'd have to do when you're out in the public, you're out on the road all the time, or you're traveling. all the time. I talked about being in Japan and being on a bus, a train, a plane, and a boat, and multiple buses,
Right.
all on the same day. While your chances of some kind of accident
Sure, it's certainly higher.
Yeah, they kind of multiply, don't they?
You got to hide that from your life insurance. I'll tell you that much anyway. Oh man. No, really, honestly, at the end of the day, I want people to make up their own minds and believe what they want to believe out of all of this. But I wanted to put that out there. That version, as far as I know, unless you've told it somewhere else, is not out there. So I'm just happy we were able to do that, because now it opens people up to a whole new, world of things to process and think about in this situation. So I just thought it was a great idea to just, like I said, get it out there. So we have Gary Hart's version. There's other versions as well. And now there's the Bob Roop version. And you obviously were there.
Chapter 20, Florida. Business in Florida was so good, and the trips were so long, that every now and then some of the boys would put up $50 each and charter 2 planes. There was a blue one called Old Blue, and an orange one inexplicably called Big Red. We leased them from a company in Tampa, and the pilots were retired military men who had flown during the Korean and Vietnam wars. One time we were coming back from Miami, and a couple of the guys lit up a number and passed it around. When it got to me and I didn't take a hit, everyone looked at me like I had gone mad. When I explained that I simply wasn't comfortable smoking a joint on someone else's plane, everyone laughed at me, called me a goody-goody, and said that it must be because I was working in the office. I made it clear that the office had nothing to do with it, but that I personally found what they were doing rude and disrespectful, because the pilot had fought for us in a war. Sure enough, the first thing the pilot did when we landed was call Eddie Graham. That incident blew up to the point that Jim Barnett was notified, and he immediately flew down for an emergency meeting with the entire roster. That in and of itself was pretty historical, because it was the first time a promoter had to come in and scold a group of guys for marijuana, and it was the first time drugs was ever be discussed in a group setting like that. The day of the meeting, I was curious to see how Jim would handle it, because I knew that he personally found nothing wrong with marijuana, as he and I had shared a few numbers over the years. When we were all gathered together, Jim told us that he was very disappointed in the guys who were smoking dope on the plane, and that whoever had smoked would be let go immediately. Meanwhile, Eddie was furiously calling every stooge he knew, and since I was on the plane and it was well known that I smoked marijuana, my name got included as one of the culprits. This had gotten out of hand, and people were literally going to lose their jobs over this incident. Even though Buddy Colt had his own plane, he was on the plane with us that night, and even thanked me for not taking a hit when it was passed to me. Once he heard that I was being implicated, he went straight to the office to speak on my behalf. He told Eddie Graham that while there were people smoking on the plane, I wasn't one of them. Buddy is a quality guy in every way. I had originally met him during my run in Georgia, and I always liked him a lot. But after he stood up for me and cleared my name when he didn't have to, I gained a newfound respect for him. In late 1974, Bill Watts told me that he had made a deal to go back to Oklahoma, where he would be the booker. He then asked me if I would come along with him and be his assistant there, as well. When I agreed, we started making plans to leave Florida, and my old friend Bobby Shane was brought in to replace Bill as the booker. The plan was that Bill and I would work through February 1975, finishing up our responsibilities and transferring the book. Chapter 21. February 19, 1975. On February 19, 1975, we had a show in the Miami Convention Center. After the matches, Bobby Shane, Buddy Colt, Dennis McCord, and I left the arena and went to Wolfie's to get something to eat, and then we went to the airport to board Buddy's plane, a single-engine Cessna 173, to go home to Tampa. Buddy was flying the plane, Dennis was next to him, Bobby was behind Buddy, and I was behind Dennis. When we had originally flown into Miami, Bobby was behind Dennis, but I asked if we could switch seats going back, because Dennis wasn't as tall as Buddy, and I could have more leg room. Bobby didn't mind at all, because it was going to be a working flight. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, Bobby was in the process of taking over the book from Bill Watts, and as Bill's assistant, I was reviewing the TV formats and going over the building managers with him, and I was also going to help him book a few shows during the flight, as well. As we left Miami, Buddy called Tampa Control and asked how the weather was over there. They said there were severe thunderstorms moving across the bay, so Buddy decided to change course and land in Sarasota. Before he could change course, an air traffic controller from McNeil Air Force Base in Tampa came on and said that if we wanted to go to Tampa, we could make it, assuring us, "You won't have any problems, and you'll probably get here before the storm comes in." Buddy asked us all if we wanted to land in Sarasota, or if we should head on to Tampa, and we collectively made the unanimous decision to go home. That's why we were on the airplane in the first place. There was no concern about the storm, because the air traffic controller assured us we would make it to Tampa in time. When we broke through the clouds over Tampa, however, we realized that the air traffic controller had seriously misjudged the storm's movement, and we were smack dab in the middle of it. The landing was going to be difficult, and on Buddy's first attempt, we were high and to the right, so he veered out over the bay to go back in for another approach. As soon as we started over the bay, Dennis screamed, "For God's sakes, pull up, we're gonna hit the water." As soon as I heard him say that, I reached down and unlatched my seatbelt. The next thing I remember was that I popped to the top of the bay, and it was at that moment I realized I had just survived a horrible event. Buddy's plane had hit the bay cartwheeling at 180 miles per hour, and as it broke apart, I was thrown out because, fortunately, I had unbuckled my seatbelt in the nick of time. The plane crashed 300 yards offshore, and I was thrown an additional 150 yards away from the wreckage. Way off in the distance, I could see a light, but I didn't see hide or hair of Bobby, Dennis, or Buddy. I started swimming towards the light, and even though it was raining badly and the water was choppy, everything seemed so serene. I started to realize that I couldn't see out of my right eye, and when I reached up to touch my head, I could feel my skull. Even still, I had no pain, no fear, and no concern. I was completely at peace, and wasn't afraid. My only ambition was to get to that light, and there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to make it. I swam for a while, and then came upon Dennis. He had gone down with the plane, but being a power lifter, was able to curl his seatbelt to give himself enough room to slip out. I was relieved to see him, but he told me he couldn't make it any further. I instructed him to lay back and float, and then I grabbed him with my left hand and pulled him along as I swam. At the time, my left arm and wrist were broken, but I didn't know it yet. I just got a grip on him, and did the backstroke with my right arm until we got to shallow water. At that point I said, "Come on, Dennis, we can walk now." He just looked at me and said, "Gary, I can't walk." Since his feet were caught in the bottom of the plane, they were all torn up and rendered useless. Then I heard Buddy's voice out in the distance, screaming, "Is anybody there? Is anybody there?" I told Dennis to stay put, and swam back out in the bay towards Buddy's screams. I don't know how far I went, but when I got to him, I immediately asked if he knew where Bobby was. He said no, so I hoped that Bobby saw the light himself and swam on his own. Buddy was severely injured. He had no problem getting off his seatbelt when he sank with the plane, but the rudder pedals wrapped around his ankle and lower leg, and broke his leg in a compound fracture. It was only hanging on by tendons. Just as I did with Dennis, I pulled Buddy to shallow water, and sat the two of them together. At that point, I turned my attention to finding Bobby. I swam back out, and started hollering his name. Of all the guys, Bobby was actually a true friend. Don't get me wrong, I liked Buddy and Dennis a lot, but I had known Bobby for years, and we lived together when we worked in Michigan. I was very concerned that he wasn't there with us, especially knowing that Buddy and Dennis went down with the plane. After calling his name for quite a while and searching to no avail, I made the decision to stop searching for Bobby, and to go get help for Buddy, Dennis, and myself. The light I had been swimming towards was on top of a dock. It was low tide, and the wall from where the water ended to the top of the dock must have been 25 feet high. There was a ladder, but there was a good 12 feet between the water and the foot of the ladder, so Dennis and Buddy let me crawl up on their backs so I could reach it. Both of them, with one leg each, stood up so that I could climb on their shoulders and reach the ladder. I climbed the ladder to the dock where the light was at. There was a boat there, so I pushed it into the bay so Buddy and Dennis could climb in and get out of the water. There was also a house by the dock, so I started pounding and kicking on the door. Unbeknownst to me, due to the force of the crash, I lost all the clothes that I had on: my shirt, my pants, my underwear, my rings, my watch, my socks, my shoes, everything. I was standing there completely naked, with caked blood all over me, and my skull exposed. When the people came to the door and saw a naked, bloody man pounding on their door, they panicked and closed the door, screaming, "Get out of here. We're calling the police." They were freaking out. This was 2:30 a.m., and they didn't know that a plane had just crashed in the bay. Fortunately, I had the presence of mind to kick on the door 5 more times to make sure that they would indeed call the police. Then, I walked back to where Buddy and Dennis were and yelled down to them, "Help is on the way." At that point, I sat down under a tree. I still didn't have any pain or any fear, and was very collected, peaceful, and calm. I heard sirens, and the first person I saw was Bob Roop's wife, who lived nearby and heard on a police scanner that a plane had gone down in the bay. She wanted to know what she could do for me, so I said, "Call my wife and tell her that I'm injured but alive, and then I'm on my way to the hospital. The next person I saw was a policeman, and as soon as he saw me he said, "I guess you won't be at the matches on Tuesday night." When I was being put into the ambulance, Dick Murdoch, who arrived after hearing about the crash, came running and jumped in the back with me. The ambulance driver started screaming that he had to get out, but Dick growled, "Nobody's throwing me out of here. He's my friend and I'm staying with him." He stayed with me and talked to me during the entire ride, even joking, "That's the biggest bump I ever saw you take." Dick was so wonderful that night, and even went into the emergency room with me. I told him, "Dickie, if I should die, tell my wife to cremate me, take me back to Texas, and spread my ashes there." He assured me he would, and waited with me until my wife arrived. The last thing I remember was that when my wife finally got to the hospital, she started crying on Dick Murdoch's belly. I went out for 3 days. When I woke up, I was extremely relieved and thankful to be alive. I told my wife I had a dream that Duke Kyomiko was here, and he told me that I was a hero the way I saved Buddy and Dennis. He even made a joke that I killed my heat, and that I'll have to work real hard to get it back. Then, when I asked him about Bobby, he said he didn't make it. "That was yesterday," she said. "It was Duke. He really was here. Eddie Graham and Jim Barnett were here, too." "I didn't see Eddie or Jim," I said. "I only talked with Duke." "No, Eddie was here," she replied. "He was in the room with you and Duke. Jim was out in the hall with me, because he couldn't bear to see you in the condition you were in." Fritz and Doris von Erich called, as well. I was hoping Duke's visit was just a dream, but unfortunately, it wasn't. I really wanted to believe that since Buddy, Dennis, and I made it, Bobby survived, as well. When my wife confirmed that Bobby had died, it had a tremendous effect on me. I was sent into despair, and all I wanted to do was go back to sleep. After sleeping for 2 more days, Fritz called again. This time I was able to speak with him, and he offered to send a plane and bring me home to Dallas. I told him that I appreciated the offer, but that I needed to stay in Florida and recuperate. He then passed the phone to Red Bastian, Danny Pletches, and Bronco Lubitsch, and I spoke with them all briefly before I went back to sleep. A few more days of sleep later, I started coming back around. At that point I knew I was messed up, because I couldn't lift my head off of the pillow or raise my arms off the bed. I literally could not move. If I coughed, the doctors would have to give me hard drugs, and if I sneezed they would have to call the Pope. The pain was just unthinkable. It was agonizing. That's the only time I ever did hard drugs in my life, and I still hurt. 280 stitches were put in my head alone. The crash knocked out all of my teeth. The tip of my nose was cut off. I lost all sight in my right eye forever. I broke my back, my left leg, my left wrist, and my left arm. I fractured my sternum and clavicle and some vertebrae on my back. I was lucky though, because when I arrived to the emergency room, there was a plastic surgeon on duty who sewed my nose back on and sewed my head up, and I really don't have bad scars on my face. I do have severe scarring on my left leg though, because when I went through the top of the plane, I caught it on the metal and steel, and it cut me up quite a bit. Even though all my injuries were on my left side, the entire right side of my body was black, blue, purple, and yellow, every disgusting color you could imagine. When Jim Barnett came with Eddie and Duke that first day, he took my wife to lunch, feeling she needed to get away from the hospital for a while. He told her that he would be sending us $500 a week to cover our costs, and that the Florida office would chip in an additional $250 a week, because we had no health insurance. They took very good care of us. I never held Buddy Colt responsible for anything. The person that put us in that situation was the air traffic controller at McNeil Air Force Base. It was his fault, not Buddy's, and I consider Buddy to be a very good friend of mine to this day. Buddy Colt would have been a great world champion, because he was 6 feet 1 inch and 238 pounds with a fabulous body. He had beautiful blonde hair, was a good-looking guy, and the ladies loved him. He was also a good performer and a good interview. Unfortunately, Buddy lost his airplane, a great deal of money, his foot, and his wrestling career that night. He lost it all, but being a Marine, Buddy overcame it all, and is as happy today as he ever was. Unfortunately, the crash messed up Dennis McCord for life. I had known Dennis from when we worked in the Carolinas together, and he also wrestled in Australia as Mike McCord, which is where I really got to know him. He was able to recover and continue wrestling, but was forever mentally tormented by that night. I will always have a special bond with him, though, and I even named my first son, Jason Dennis, after him. Bobby Shane, God love him, was finished on this earth. Even though he had only been in the business for 11 years, he made quite a name for himself, and has left behind a great legacy. His early, untimely death is all the more tragic because he had such a tremendous career in front of him, given the fact that he had just gotten his very first booking job in the States. I was very depressed over his death, and had tremendous feelings of guilt for not finding him. One of the things that really compounded my guilt was that I had been holding some animosity towards him for when he was seemingly taking Jerry Jarrett's side in Georgia. Looking back, I now realize that he was only trying to help. The other thing that I agonized about was the fact that I switched seats with him to have more legroom. Yes, I know that I unlatched my seat belt, and that was how I survived, but who knows? Maybe if I had stayed in my seat and my legs were up against Buddy's chair, I wouldn't have been able to clear the plane, and Bobby would have. Those two things, the grudge I was holding and the fact that we switched seats, really affected me after the crash, added to my remorse, and tormented me for quite some time. Bobby's parents were kind enough to come and visit me. They knew how guilty I felt, got the coroner's report, and showed it to me, stressing, "Gary, even if you had found him, he would already have been dead. He only had a tiny bit of water in his lungs." No matter how hard I wanted to believe that Bobby found his own light that night, what happened was, as we went in the bay, Bobby hit his head on the inside of the plane, and that killed him instantly. As time went by, the knowledge that Bobby died on impact did ease the pain a bit, but it was still very difficult. I eventually talked to my good friend Don Jardine about my grief, and he told me that no one could have done more than I had, and that I shouldn't feel guilty. He said, "I wasn't surprised that you were the one who saved them, because you have very strong willpower and a very strong mind, but don't ever feel guilty, because if it wasn't for you, maybe Buddy and Dennis wouldn't be alive." Don's words were very comforting to me, but I suffered from survivor guilt for a long time. It was very hard for me. Dealing with Bobby's death was harder than the crash and the swim to shore. It was overwhelming. When I think about that night, I wonder how I survived. It's amazing that I did everything I did: swimming, getting Dennis, getting Buddy, trying to find Bobby, climbing the ladder, dropping the boat, and kicking on the door, all the while with broken bones. I was truly at death's door, and for a long while that realization messed me up, as well. However, I survived, and I'm just thankful that I made it through and that I can walk around, enjoy my life, and do the things that I do now. People tell me I'm a hero, but I don't want to hear that, and don't see myself that way. I see myself as someone who God gave the strength to get out of a horrible situation. I never attributed that to me. I attribute that to God and a higher power. It was hard to keep that story quiet, because there were articles and pictures about the plane crash and of us in our hospital rooms all throughout Florida. I really had to live the hero image down to maintain my Playboy Gary Hart persona, and that took a while. Stories began spreading about that night, and to this day there are so many rumors about the crash that many people have heard distorted tales. One lore, for example, is that the bay was infested with sharks. If there had been sharks in the water that night, with all the blood we lost, we would have been eaten up. Now I'd love to tell you how I had to fight off the sharks that night, but it just isn't true. I don't know why people make stuff up about the crash. The truth is horrific enough. Oddly enough, I never suffered from any type of fear of flying after that, and got on airplanes with no problem. If I did get anything from that experience, though, it was a new perspective on life. To live every day like it's my last, to spend time with the people that I care about, to let them know I care about them, and most importantly, to laugh and have a good time. The true way to happiness is through laughter, because laughter brings love and happiness. Since the crash, I've tried to stay as true to those as possible, so in that sense, the crash.
WWE Hall of Famer Ricky Morton on the School of Morton podcast talked with the Universal Heartthrob Austin Idol. He provided graphic details about the plane crash that he barely survived. Download the full episode for free at rickymortononline.com.
Ever had a dream where you dreamt in slow motion?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
Okay, so this is what happened. We hit impact, and everything became like a dream to me in slow motion. And it was like a spinning slow motion, and water was everywhere. I mean, everywhere. The power of the water hitting me. And it really felt like a dream. I mean, if I would have died then, it would have been, I guess, an easy way out, because I would have never really known what hit me. But all of a sudden, the motion, the slow motion, everything stops. I realized, God, you crashed in the plane, but you're still alive. I still have my senses about me. So you've crashed in the plane, but you're still alive, and I'm still in the cockpit. I was riding shotgun. Bobby was behind me, I believe Bobby, I'm pretty sure Bobby was behind. Yeah, he was. Bobby was behind me, and Gary Hart was sitting next to Bobby behind Buddy Colt. But anyway, I realized crashing the plane, you're still alive. That's a miracle in itself. And you got to get out of here and free yourself. And the fuselage, I'm going down with the fuselage. It's sinking, and I'm strapped into my seatbelt. And I'm reaching down trying to get my seatbelt off because it's a slow submerging process, but I'm slowly submerging, and I had cowboy boots on. And in the passenger seat with the cockpit up front, you're riding shotgun, you have you have foot pedals. So somehow those foot pedals, my feet got lodged underneath those foot pedals, and it kind of crushed, and I couldn't get my feet out. And now I'm really fighting because I know now, oh man, you survived the crash, but you're going to drown. That was my next. Yeah, I think now you can't get out. Now you're going to drown, and I'm fighting like a son of a gun to try to free myself up. I get my seatbelt off, and finally, grace of God, my feet just came out of those cowboy boots, and I came up to the surface. So, you're immediately, you're in shock. So you're in shock, but I'll never forget it. Here I am, I'm treading water out in Tampa Bay.
Were you really far off the shore?
They say, I've heard quarter to half a mile. But I tell you, Ricky, I couldn't tell you. But far enough, I can tell you that.
Yes.
I got definitely you. Far enough. You're in survival mode now. Your adrenaline's pumping like crazy. But I'm treading water, and the water's choppy, obviously, with the whitecaps. It's choppy, and I don't hear anything but water crashing. I hear nothing. And now I'm thinking, I'm the only one that survived because I don't hear any voices or anything. And I yelled out, hey, is everybody okay? Everybody okay? Nothing. Nothing. And then I yelled out again, is everybody okay? And then I hear Gary Hart say, yeah, I'm over here. And Gary must have been, 25, 30 yards from me. I guess, he got thrown out. Then I heard Buddy Colt's voice, but no Bobby Shane's voice.
Yes.
There was never Bobby Shane's voice. And Bobby went down with Bobby. I got out. Bobby went down with the plane. He never got out. So I don't know if he was killed on impact or if he drowned because Bobby couldn't swim. And I do know that he was deathly afraid of the water. I made a couple of feeble attempts to try to look for him, but they were feeble. It's pitch black. You can't see anything. You're in shock. So finally, we made our way to finally we just saw the lights of the residential area, and we swam to the dock. And Buddy couldn't stand up because of his legs were really messed up. My feet were both crushed. We got down. Fortunately, it was low tide. If it had been high tide out, I don't know. We may all drowned out there, but it was low tide, and Buddy and I were hanging on to this dock, this pier, the doctor's pier, and Gary got up on our shoulders, and like a bloody monster, he went to the house, pounded on the door. A doctor came to the door, and they called the hospital, and 911 did, and they came and scooped us out of the water.
I know by listening to your voice, it's hard to talk about that. Things in our business that we've done on the road. I've been in a lot of situations, not that bad. I flew with Ronnie Garvin a couple of times, and gosh, after that, man, I was commercial all the way. But, and I'm sorry for that situation because not only that, in that crash, he lost one of the greatest minds in our business that went down with it too. But thank you for telling us that story. Never really asked you about it before because, it wasn't the right time and the right place. But I think you telling me and letting the fans know, I think it's to understand what you go through to be in our business and what you go through to be now and who you became and all that and to overcome all that, Austin. That's a lot for me. I may have for you to tell me that.
Well, and the thing about it is, life is a learning experience. It's a learning experience, and I tell you, I learned a lot from that. I really learned a lot from that because at the time, I'm a young kid still, and I'm chasing my career, and after I really did all the rehab and kind of got my head back together a little bit, I realized that life can end real quickly. it's like a light switch. You can turn off the switch and bang, all of a sudden it's all over. So it really helped me kind of get, for me personally, prioritizing what was most important to me.
The full episode where Austin Idol also discusses working with Paul Heyman, Vince McMahon Sr., and Captain Lou Albano. Available for free at RickyMortonOnline.com. Click School of Morton Podcast.
Hello everyone, for1wrestling.com. This is Bill Apter. February 20th, 1975. The headlines in the Miami Herald. One of the most horrific days in all of wrestling history. One of the most horrific days in just about everyone's lives. And one of the four men who was in this plane crash that claimed the life of Bobby Shane, and also on that plane was Buddy Colt, who was piloting that plane, and manager Gary Hart, and a man named Dennis Mike McCord, who survived and eventually morphed into this fellow right here, Austin Idol, 40 years. Welcome to the After Chat.
Thank you, Bill. It's of course it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's unbelievable that it's been 40 years since this happened. I mean, it's hard to believe. It seems, for me, it seems like yesterday.
So, actually, we know you're Austin Idol, but if you wouldn't mind removing the glasses, so there's glare generally from my head that people complain about, but there he is.
You're not asking me to strip, are you, Bill?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on and discuss this, and it's something, of course, you could not be lighthearted about for so many years. It was hard to talk about, and I remember just a few days after the plane crash, you were kind enough, when I was working for the wrestling magazines, to do an audio interview with me, and I'm trying to get that audio tape so we can run it either today or somewhere in the next few weeks. But 40 years later, and you told me this 40 years ago, that you didn't think you would ever stop having nightmares about that day. Are you still having nightmares about it?
No.
Okay.
I don't have nightmares about it, and the thing is, Bill, for me, I'm the kind of guy that really focuses on today and not yesterday or tomorrow. So I really focus on today, but occasionally, something might trigger it. And when it does, I'll think about it, but I won't dwell on it. So I'll give it some thought and I won't dwell on it. It's just like this big article that hit, I think it started actually in the Tampa Tribune, then it went to the Miami Herald, the Washington Times, picked it up, and it kind of went all around the country about the crash, which was 40 years ago.
Yeah. So back then, of course, there was no social media, there were no cell phones. And I remember the way I had found out was I called the Tampa wrestling office to speak with Gordon Soley to get information on what was going on with the TV that week. And at that point, I think I was only one of like 2 or 3 people to find out about it. Can you imagine if that happened in this day and age of social media?
It would have gone viral.
Yeah.
No doubt. I mean, it would have gone viral. I mean, it was such big news back then. And, of course, wrestling was so different. I mean, it was so different. And in Florida, in particular, if you can, I know you can remember back, Eddie Graham being the promoter, and he was a genius. And the way Eddie had built that area, I mean, truly, professional wrestling was viewed just about like the National Football League. I mean, it was that credible, and it was huge news when that event happened.
Yeah. So the one of the points that I wanted to bring out about that crash that Bobby Shane unfortunately couldn't get out of. Tell us, for the people who don't know about this, if you can kind of give a shorthand scenario of, what happened that day and how you survived.
Well, it's such an unusual story. That day we were going to fly from Tampa to wrestle in Miami. Then, as a matter of fact, I was booked on a commercial airlines. I was booked on Delta Airlines. Yeah, so I was going to fly Delta, go down to Miami, stay over, and fly back on Thursday morning. And during the course of the day, my friend Gary Hart said, "Hey, I'm flying down with Buddy Colt and Bobby Shane, and we have a seat."
And Gary Hart, yeah.
Yeah, we have a seat available if you'd like to fly down with us. He said the upside to it is that you can fly down and be home that same night. You don't have to stay over. And I told him, I said, "No, I'm set, Gary. Thank you, but I'm going to go commercial." And then throughout the course of the day, Gary kept saying to me on and on, says, "You really ought to come down. You really ought to come down." And sometimes you just, even though your inner voice is telling you no, you disobey your inner voice, and usually that's going to bite you. And I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
So I disobeyed my inner voice, and I went for the trip. Trip down was fine. Coming back, everything was beautiful. The skies were perfect. The stars were perfect. It was a beautiful fall night in February. We were about 50 miles out, around Sarasota. Weather is still beautiful. And Buddy, who I did not know at the time, only had 50, like in 50 hours. That's
a pilot, yeah.
50 hours is nothing. Of course, I didn't know that, and that was probably...
Well, no, you get caught up in the whole, come on, let's go, yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, Buddy we had flown out of Tampa International, and Buddy had called Tampa International just to let them know where we are, and, he was going to be landing there relatively soon. And the flight controller said Tampa International is closed down due to weather, rain and fog. And the flight controller said, "But you can land at Prudhoe Night Airport. It's open." So it depends on how you define open. Mm-hmm. Open for what kind of qualified pilot, a visual rated pilot or an instrument rated pilot. Mm-hmm. But he was not instrument rated. And the controller, who knew that because he asked Buddy, he said, "You should be fine." And Prudhoe Night is off of Davis Island, where a lot of the Yankees live. Derek Jeter's built that big, colossal home there, and a bunch of those guys live there. But it's right there at Tampa Bay. So as we were coming in for the landing, Bill, the weather continued to degrade. Visibility was degrading. It was raining, and finally, Buddy saw the runway lights, and as he went to approach the runway, by the time he got in there, he was too high.
Yeah.
He wasn't low enough to actually touch down and land. So he instinctively pulled up on the yoke and banked. And now, it's fog. You can't see anything. You really can't see anything. So he banked, and when he banked over the actual residential area there.
Yeah.
And then came back over the water, and nobody was saying anything. It was so intense.
Of course.
Everybody knew that this was serious. And as Buddy was banking, he's now over the water, and we're all looking for the runway lights. The next thing I knew is that, this happened in a flash. I saw water, big white caps. And by the time my brain registered water, crash, bang, we hit. Yeah, it was almost like have you ever had a dream where it was in slow motion?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. This was like everything went into slow motion. And really, if I would have died in that crash, it would have been a very easy way out, no doubt about it. But all of a sudden, when I saw the white caps, and I went, oh, like, oh my God. I don't think I even got the word God out. I think I wanted to say, oh my God. Everything went into slow motion, and it was like I was tumbling in the water, and it was just, so surreal.
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew was that I was sinking down into the water because the plane obviously crashed. Yeah, I'm sinking into the water. And if it would have knocked me out, I would have been dead for sure. I would have been dead. I'm sure it knocked Bobby out.
Yeah, yeah.
But it did. Thank God, it did knock me out. And I'm sinking, and I'm fighting. I mean, I'm fighting to get out of my seatbelt because I've realized, gosh, you've crashed, but you're not dead. I'm trying to get out of my seatbelt, and for whatever reason, maybe because it got wet. I mean, I really struggled to get out of that belt. But finally, it came loose, and I was trying to make my way to the surface, but I was sitting in the cockpit in the front side, the passenger side up front. Your buddy is in that small plane. It has those foot pedals, rudders, they call them. So my feet got caught underneath those rudders because everything was crushed. You saw the pictures of the plane. You said,
Yes, yeah.
Anybody survived that. But my feet got crushed, hung underneath those rudders. So I was trying to, extricate myself. And finally, grace of God, my feet actually slipped out of my cowboy boots.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I made my way to the surface, and which was another freaky moment because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, February 1975. That was the summer. Earlier that summer was when the movie Jaws came out.
Oh, right, of course.
People across the country were scared to get in the shower, much less go swimming. You remember that caused a big deal.
Yes. Yeah.
Freaked people out. They wouldn't go get in the water. And so Tampa Bay is notorious for sharks. It's just
I never realized about I've heard this story from you years ago, but I never realized the shark element.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so, but I was aware enough to know, so, man, here you are in Tampa Bay. I'm at the surface now, and it's just eerily quiet. All I could hear was water, because it was whitecaps.
So you hadn't seen Gary or Buddy at this point yet?
Nobody. I thought I was the lone survivor.
Okay.
Yeah, and I yelled out, "Is everybody okay?" Nothing. Just the water and me. And I'm thinking, everybody's dead. And then I believe I heard Gary's voice first. He yelled out, and then eventually Buddy yelled out. I hollered out for Bobby, and didn't get a response. Tried it a couple more times, no response, and then I thought, yeah, it was terrible. It was to no avail. I dove down, and this is not like a hero story because it's not, but I dove down into the water a couple times thinking maybe I could feel for him, maybe I could grab him. And, it's dark, you can't see, it's freezing cold. And a couple times, and I gave up and said, well, he didn't make it. And then we all swam for the shore.
Horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, so here I am, 40 years later, alive and well, and thankful and grateful.
Yeah. How did you get to Civil back? How did you get to the shore there?
Well, we swam, and it was a couple of football fields away.
I was going to ask you how far you were away.
Yeah, about 600 yards.
Yeah.
Pretty good swim.
And if I remember correctly, there was a home there, and the three of you knocked on the door, and...
Well, not quite. We here's another thing. It's a strange thing. It was low tide. If it had not have been low tide, we would have all drowned. But it just happened to be low tide, and so we all saw lights that said to us, "Okay, there's where the homes are. Swim toward the lights." And there was a dock, a dock.
Yeah.
And by the time we got there, Buddy couldn't stand up because of his injuries, as you know, he was horrific.
Yes.
I couldn't stand up because I had some bad injuries myself, and I couldn't stand up because I had foot injuries.
I remember that picture that you sent that we ran in the magazine of that big hole under your toe. I mean, I never was able to get that out of my mind, that chunk out of your foot.
Yeah, a big chunk, like an ice cream scooper, just taking the flesh out of your foot. You know?
Yeah.
I couldn't stand up, and so we got down on our knees, and Gary got up on our shoulders, and he hoisted himself up onto the pier. And Gary was a mess, broken back.
Yeah.
Blood was everywhere, and he went to the door of that particular home, which was a doctor's home, and reluctantly they let this bleeding guy in because I'm sure he looked like a monster. And I think it was a week or two before, they'd had a murder on Davis Island, so the neighborhood's all freaked out.
Oh, of course, and now here you have somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they let Gary in, then they called emergency, and then they came with choppers and the whole deal.
Boy, what a story. And I know about all the years of physical rehab that you had, and eventually, thank goodness that you were able to get back in the ring and become Austin Idol. And well, it's funny because this is one anniversary that you look at every year on the calendar and get the chills that's the day that this happened. And I wanted to make sure, it's funny because you and I talk a lot on the phone, but what was weird is that I just out of nowhere the other day, I said to you, when was the anniversary of the crash? And you said, it's coming up. February 20th, and we hadn't talked in a few months.
Right.
And it's weird that we just connected, and for some reason I just haven't asked you that. So there was a reason we needed to be here today to remember what happened and how we lost Bobby Shane as well. So thank you for doing this today.
Absolutely, Bill.